There's a textbook battle brewing in Texas. What's decided in Texas will determine what your state textbooks will include. A New York Times article starts with this headline, "How Christian Were the Founders?" And it's a very long article about the textbook battle that's taking place in the state of Texas. Many people don't realize that the state of Texas and also the state of California, and to a lesser degree the states of Illinois and New York, determine what textbooks are going to be for all of the states. And the reason for this is simply a money matter. Since California and Texas have the largest populations, textbook manufacturers pretty much design their textbooks for what Texas requires and what California requires. Not so much California anymore, because California has all types of idiosyncrasies in their textbooks, and also because of the budgetary crisis in California, California can't really afford to buy new textbooks. So now all the attention is being placed on the state of Texas, because they have a huge endowment. In fact, the state's $22 billion education fund is among the largest educational endowment in the country. And Texas distributes 48 million textbooks every year. And textbook manufacturing is very expensive, goes through a very sophisticated editorial process. And again, it all comes down to what a particular state school board is going to require. It goes through an adoption process and so forth. And so you can see this is a very large market for a textbook publisher. Now, in 1998, guidelines were set up under Texas Educational Knowledge and Skills called TEKS, T-E-K-S. And again, there's nothing wrong with setting up guidelines. I mean, everybody has to do it. But we need to be reminded that when you put a textbook together, you have to choose some material and you have to eliminate some material. You can't put everything in a textbook. And then there is the interpretation phase of things. So once you choose what goes in a textbook and what you decide does not go in a textbook, there is the editorial staff that puts these textbooks together that actually writes the copy about these particular events. And so there's a huge battle going on about who gets to decide what goes in, who gets to decide what goes out, and who gets to interpret what is left in the textbooks. And this is the battle that has been fought in Texas for close to 40 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But right now, there are a number of conservative Christians on the school board, and they are really messing with kind of the status quo of how textbooks are produced in Texas and what goes in these textbooks, in two particular areas. In the science area and in the history area, you're beginning to see that pressure is beginning to build. It says the choice, the two biggest battlefields, as I mentioned, are over science and history. On the science side, some board members want to require science teachers to cover the strengths and weaknesses of the theory of evolution. And again, I don't see anything wrong with this, especially in the light of what we're seeing with so-called climate change, global warming. That scientists aren't neutral observers. They have a particular worldview that they are going to promote. They have a particular point of view that they are going to promote, and they get money for that worldview. And we're beginning to see that scientists aren't immune from fudging on statistics and pushing a particular agenda. And so we shouldn't be surprised that the same thing is happening on the creation evolution side of things. So I have no problem at all. Nobody should have any problem with questioning the theory of evolution. We tried this in Cobb County here in Georgia just by putting a sticker on the book, and a court ruled that was somehow unconstitutional. How questioning a scientific theory that is not empirical in nature is unconstitutional is beyond me, and constitutes an establishment of religion is way beyond my understanding, but that's the way things are these days. There are 7 Christian conservatives on the school board, and and as a result, they are questioning the way these textbooks are being written. One woman who's a board member who considers herself a conservative Republican, but stands against this 7-member block of voters. She says they do vote as a block, and they work consciously to pull one more vote in order to present their particular cause. And my question to this, and liberals don't do this? Don't you think before conservatives got involved in this, Christian conservatives got involved in school boards, that liberals didn't vote as a block? Are we that naive to think that only Christian conservatives vote as a block and push a particular ideological agenda? Now, there is no neutrality. Somebody is always, again, as I mentioned, picking what facts are going to go in, historical events are going to go in, which are going to be left out, and who gets to interpret those facts. Now, again, as I mentioned, this has been going on for nearly 40 years. Mel and Norma Gabler proved this with the way they scrutinized textbooks for nearly 40 years. They got involved in reviewing textbooks when they found factual errors in their 14-year-old son's textbook. This was back in the, some time ago, I think back in the 60s, maybe the early 70s. In particular, there was the absence of "under God" from the text of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Further studies showed interpretive bias on economic, political, and religious subjects. And their most famous find was a 1973 fifth grade American history textbook that devoted more attention to Marilyn Monroe than to George Washington. And Norma Gabler remarked, "We're not quite ready for Marilyn Monroe as the mother of our country." And this is an aspect of textbook writing that's very important. If you were to pull a particular historical event or some person or some idea out of a textbook, would it matter in the understanding of any part of history? If you put something into a textbook, does it matter if that person is put in there? Taking Marilyn Monroe out of a textbook doesn't matter historically. It doesn't frame the nation at all. But of course, having less material about George Washington and the founding era has enormous impact on a nation. So it's obvious that Marilyn Monroe is put in there probably to satisfy, I guess, the desires of students to know more about pulp culture, which they can get almost anywhere. In 2001, Time magazine reported that their scroll of shame, the Gablers' scroll of shame of textbook mistakes since 1961, was 54 feet long. In the early 1990s, Texas fined publishers about $1 million for failing to remove hundreds of factual errors the Gablers had found in 11 history books. An example, a textbook said that Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina had supported the tariff of 1816, and he actually opposed it. So this isn't anything new. You can go all the way back not too long ago where Paul Vitz did a study of elementary school social study books, and he says there were 30 pages of material on the Pilgrims. So, in looking at these particular textbooks, there was 30 pages of material on the Pilgrims, including the first Thanksgiving. But there is not one word or image that referred to religion as even a part of the Pilgrim's life. One mother whose son is in a class using this book wrote that he came home and told her that Thanksgiving was when the Pilgrims gave thanks to the Indians. Their mother called the principal of the suburban New York City school to point out that Thanksgiving was when the Pilgrims thanked God. The principal responded by saying that was her opinion. The schools could only teach what was in the books. And so this whole textbook feud that's going on in Texas right now is going to have a significant impact of what's going to take place in public schools across the country, because whatever the textbooks are that Texas decides to choose, they will be in your school as well.
For more related to today's topic, check out America's Christian History, The Untold Story. You will find it at AmericanVision.com.